Thank you, Doug. It's been a very pleasant morning this morning that we've spent with Dr. Hathaway, and it's my pleasure to introduce him. The Reverend Alvin C. Hathaway Sr. was called to Union Baptist Church as the assistant pastor in 2004. He was elevated to the position of pastor of the historic Servant Church in 2007. He succeeds the legendary Reverend Dr. Vernon N. Dobson, noted theologian, community activist, and civil rights leader. Reverend Hathaway has the distinction of being the 10th pastor in the church's history. He's a native Baltimorean. He's a son of Union Baptist Church. He's truly a man of God. He acknowledged his call to the ministry through obedience to Christ. He prepared himself academically and spiritually for shepherding God's children. Reverend Hathaway has earned 2 terminal degrees, a PhD in philosophy of religion from North Carolina College of Theology, and a Doctor of Ministry degree from the United Theological Seminary. He earned his Master of Arts in Church Ministries and a certificate in urban ministry from St. Mary's Seminary. He is a graduate of the Harvard Divinity School Summer Leadership Institute. He earned a certificate in exegesis, hermeneutics, and homiletics from Georgetown College and Regents Park College, Oxford University. He has a BA in religious studies from the McKendree School of Religion. He studied philosophical theology at was then Coppin State College and was the first president of the Philosophical Theology Club. He's a recipient of the following fellowships: the National Civic League in 2001, the Fosheimer Fellow and Maryland Historical Society in 2005, the Baltimore City College High School. I skipped a line there. In 2005, the Lord Baltimore Fellow. Reverend Hathaway is a graduate of Baltimore City College High School. He's a member of the Academy of Homiletics and the Society of Biblical Literature. He was inducted into the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers of Morehouse College on April 12, 2012. We're very pleased to have him here with us today. I think you'll enjoy what he has to say very much. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone? Good afternoon now. It is my pleasure to be here. I brought my I know that I can, if I did not get an amen, I brought all my colleagues with me, my dear beloved wife, who I know at least when I say let the church say amen, there should be an amen. I want to commend these marvelous and wonderful professors, persons. They've just been such a blessing to me and to my family, just ushering us into this. Really, I met a gentleman, he said, you are in God's country. And I believe you're right. You are studying in one of God's beloved places. And so I just want to challenge your thinking. I want to share with you just some of the things that from the perspective of my faith community, some of our understandings, and prayerfully at the end of this, if there's time for questions, I could open myself up for questions. I titled this, Faith Brings Light to Darkness. Really, it's a personal testimony of triumph. Westminster Dictionary of Theological Terms by Donald K. McKim defines faith this way. In Christianity, belief, trust, and obedience to God as revealed in Jesus Christ. Faith affects all dimensions of one's existence: intellect, emotions, and will. In a recent visit to Rome, I walked the rugged, stony trail of Paul's martyrdom. Shackled and chained, beaten and abused, he made his faithful walk with a resoluteness of spirit and belief in Jesus Christ. He would be beheaded and hung upside down because of his faith in God. Therefore, Paul, for me, gives a definition of faith that is really my operative context. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I believe faith brings light to darkness. Everyone and every human organization have dark moments. Dark moments are best described by St. John of the Cross in his poem, Dark Night of the Soul. In that poem, darkness represents the journey through hardship and difficulty the soul meets in detachment from the world as it is. It seeks to reach the light of the union with the Creator. It's a darkness people endure as they seek to grow in spiritual maturity and union with God. There are many examples in one's faith and throughout faith that faith brings light to darkness. The Bible in the Gospel of John records the story of Thomas when he encounters a risen Jesus Christ. The days prior to his encounter were dark days. The Messiah who has given hope and healing to so many people was seemingly gone, hung on a cross, buried in a borrowed tomb. Despair, persecution, and anguish was in the air. Now enters Thomas, who is sometimes called doubting. He poses questions to Jesus to verify his reality. Then, as Sylvia suggests in his book, Thomas, Love as Strong as Death, this: his courageous commitment to Jesus carries him over from one realm to the next, and it helps to carry the other disciples over as well. His ability to question and his understanding and sense to ask questions, to have those questions affirmed so that the darkness that he was feeling now became light, carried others over as well. I offer that Thomas' questioning affirms his faith, and his faith carried him and others through the darkness of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. On October 1, 2000, the Roman Catholic Church elevated to sainthood Josephine Bahati. She was born in Darfur, Sudan in 1869, died in Italy on February 8, 1947. She was kidnapped at the age of 7 and sold into slavery. For 13 years, she suffered inhuman treatment, brutality, beatings, scarrings, and lashes by the hands of her masters and their families. Robert Zanini remarks, as one who overcame great cultural, racial, and social distances in her life, Bahati helps us in our own day to grasp the immense horizon of what it is that makes us truly free. Each one of us is a slave to something or to many things. We know it by the weight of the chains that still hold us in the thrall, teetered to the earth, making us second guess even those earthly inspirations that stir our hearts most deeply. And Bahati keeps repeating to each person she meets, holiness is not an extraordinary event, but rather a hope that belongs to everyone. Darkness imposed by the insensitivity of others creates tunnels of despair. Nevertheless, the human capacity to love and be loved by an awesome God equips one with the working tools to overcome and to triumph. Standing here before you at Brigham Young University, the Y. Your faith tradition provides a poignant example of faith bringing light to darkness. It was in 1844 when your founder, Joseph Smith, was arrested on the charge of destroying property, was placed in jail. A genteel mob seized this opportunity. Armed men stormed the jail, broke in, and assassinated both Joseph and his brother Hiram. That was a dark moment for Mormonism. But the faith of Brigham Young, who refused to allow the darkness dim his hope, and with a rugged determination followed God's plan for his life. In 1847, he began the long, hard, and difficult march to this land, the Salt Lake Basin. And as people would say, the rest is history. These stories affirm my belief that the unseen hand of God undergirds you in moments of darkness, and that one's faith in God can propel you through the obstacles that will surely come your way. Union Baptist Church, the church where I serve, began in 1852. It was a period of time when Maryland was a slave state. The effects of slavery reached every corner of American life. In 1860, there was 87,000 slaves in Maryland and almost as many free blacks. This small band of people determined to follow their faith in the midst of darkness. Banded together and according to its constitution, the church was incorporated as Union Baptist Church of Baltimore in May 10, 1852. This was 11 years before President Abraham Lincoln would deliver his Emancipation of Proclamation address in 1863. Union Baptist Church experienced growing pains, but its progress was slow and steady. From the organizing minister, Reverend John Carey, from 1852 to 1855, through the tenure of Reverend William P. Thompson from 1869 to 1872, Union Baptist Church experienced steady growth due to expanding population of free men in Baltimore. In fact, from 1810 to the abolition of slavery in the state in November 1864, Maryland contained the largest free Negro population in the country. After the Civil War, the Negro population in Baltimore City experienced significant growth, from 27,898 in 1860 to 39,580 in 1870. Concurrently with this growth in population, Union Baptist Church called a pivotal minister to its pastorate in 1872, the Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson. Reverend Harvey Johnson, its fifth pastor. As it was stated, I'm the 10th pastor. Served for 50 years from 1872 to 1923. During the period of Dr. Johnson's ministry at Union Baptist Church, conditions in America for the black community produced a plethora of leadership to address the injustice African Americans were facing at the hands of societal and governmental systems that denied them full human rights. The ethical preconditions for democracy is to allow every voice of the citizenry to be heard in the basic decisions that shape the destiny of its people. The political prerequisite for democracy is to secure the rights and the liberties for every citizen, especially for the most vulnerable ones. And the economic requirement for democracy is fair opportunity to every citizen. Dr. Gates of Harvard and Dr. Cornel West of Princeton identified this same period, these personalities: W.B. Du Bois, Thomas Fortune, Matthew Henson, Jack Johnson, Scott Joplin, Madam C.J. Walker, Booker T. Washington, Ida B. Wells, Burt Williams, Murray McLeod Bethune, George Washington Carver, Benjamin O. Davis, Thomas Dorsey, W. Handy, James Weldon Johnson, Carter G. Woodson, Louis Armstrong, Josephine Baker, Bessie Coleman, Marcus Garvey, Langston Hughes, all were contemporary leaders of Dr. Harvey Johnson. In fact, you'll find in the papers of W.B. Du Bois, you'll find letters between Dr. Johnson and W.B. Du Bois. In the papers of Booker T. Washington, you'll find letters being transferred between both of those individuals. Committed to lifelong learning, Dr. Johnson was born on April 4, 1843 in Farquhar County, Virginia. He entered Wayland Seminary in 1868 and graduated in 1872. He was a prolific writer through letters, sermons, pamphlets, and a book. His book, The Nations from a New Point of View, was published in 1903. I had the opportunity, because I was searching for that book. I went on to Amazon.com and bought it from a dealer in Australia. Can you imagine? I had to pay $165 for this book that someone had in Australia of the fifth pastor of Union Baptist Church. Along with his wife, Amelia E. Johnson, they created a team ministry that served the Negro community in every form of human endeavor, and they addressed the critical issues of the day. Mr. A.B. Koga, he writes, a very prolific writer who happened to be my Sunday school teacher. On April the 17th, 1887, Reverend Johnson claimed for his wife, Miss Amelia E. Hall, a very accomplished woman of Montreal, Canada. Within her home right, Mrs. Johnson was a popular and proven a great help to a distinguished husband. She was the author of 3 charming and beautiful stories back in that time: Clarence and Corinne, or God's Way; The Hazel Family, 1894; The Martina Meridian, or What Is My Motive, in 1901, which was published by the American Baptist Publishing Company. Amelia Johnson's literary status has been dimmed by the scant, almost anorexic information that has accompanied her recovery. Instead of finding meaning in Johnson's life and writing through concrete social interactions, to borrow from historian Elisa Barkley Brown, we have a tendency to attribute inherent meaning to certain activities in ways that obscure rather than explain historically significant developments of social relations between black man and black woman. Such reductive class and gender-based assumptions have adhered to Johnson, who is often seen simply as a preacher's wife, instead of being placed in the context of what Dr. Evelyn Higginbotham of Harvard characterized as the complex and also deep horizontal comradeship possible across genders. Dr. Johnson moved easily among the leading male figures of the day. Miss Amelia E. Johnson equally moved as well among the leading female figures of that day. As a testimony to Amelia's writing prowess, she wrote the foreword to Dr. Johnson's book, The Nations, from a New Point of View. During the ministry of Dr. Johnson, he established 15 churches and ordained 11 ministers. What was significant about this was the outcome was that those ministers became some of his closest collaborators, and the churches became the institutional base from which he would address local, national, and institutional issues. Let's take a look at some of the talent he nurtured. Gentleman's name was William Montague Alexander. Was a protege of Dr. Johnson, was born in 1852. Reverend Alexander was so strongly influenced by Dr. Johnson that in 1879, at the age of 27, after being ordained, he enrolled in Dr. Johnson's alma mater, Wayland Seminary. He graduated on February 5, 1885. He founded Sharon Baptist Church and became its first pastor. Inspired by his mentor, Reverend Alexander encouraged the establishment of the Northwestern Supply Company, inspired his members to rent stalls in Lafayette Market for the sale of vegetables and fruits and meats and produce and the like. He organized and was the first editor of the African American newspaper, was elected chairman of a group known as the Colored Men's Suffrage League, was the founder of the People's Fraternal Beneficial Society, was the editor and manager of the Maryland Voice, and organized the Lot Carey Baptist Foreign Mission Convention. A group of leaders met at Shiloh Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. on December 1897 and organized the Lot Carey Baptist Foreign Mission. It was aimed chiefly as the protest against the policy of the National Baptist Convention, at that time was using approximately 75% of its foreign mission funds for operating expenses and spending only 25% of its funds on the foreign fields. The convention elected Reverend William Alexander, founder and great developer of Sharon Baptist Church of Baltimore, to serve as its first corresponding secretary. The next personality that I would mention would be the Reverend Garrett Russell Waller. He formed Trinity Baptist Church in 1887. Reverend Waller organized the Baptist Ministers Conference of Baltimore and vicinity in 1908, became its first president. Lastly, I would mention the Reverend Frank Randolph Williams. He was the founder and first pastor of Perkins Square Baptist Church that was organized in 1881. Through his ministry at Perkins Square Baptist, he influenced the creation of 10 churches. Can't you see how marvelous it is for faith to speak and operate and bring light to darkness? Through the efforts of this gentleman, all of these churches and all of these faith communities were born. The Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson's ability to organize collective action was instrumental in the early freedom rights gains of black Americans in Baltimore and around the country. On June 22nd, 1885, Dr. Johnson invited 5 of his confidential friends to come to his study at 775 West Lexington Street. There were the Reverends J.C. Allen, the pastor of First Baptist Church, F.H. Braxton, the pastor of Calvary Baptist Church, now extinct, William Montague Alexander, that I mentioned, the pastor of Sharon Baptist Church, and W.C. Lawson, the pastor of Macedonia Baptist Church. Very carefully, Dr. Johnson unfolded to these men the gigantic vision that he held. They were transformed. They urged him to launch and to plan there and then, and Dr. Johnson, in characteristic fashion, then produced the tentative Constitution, revealed his immediate plans, and a giant was born. Dr. Johnson accepted the presidency itself, and the Reverend W. Alexander was elected secretary. This is important. The Mutual United Brotherhood of Liberty was born with a stated mission to use all legal means within its power to procure and maintain our rights as citizens of this common country. I want you to keep that in mind. In June 22nd, 1885, was created the Mutual United Brotherhood of Liberty. Of the ideals that animated the American nation as its beginning, none was more reliant or honored than the inherent quality of mankind. There was dignity in all human flesh. Americans proclaimed and all must have its chance to strive and to excel. All men were to be protected alike from the threat of rapacious neighbors and from the prying or coercive state. If it is a sin to aspire to a conduct of a high order than one may be capable of, then Americans surely sin in professing that all men are created equal and then acting otherwise. Nor did time close the gap between that profession and the widespread practice of racism in the land. The nation prospered mightily nevertheless, and few were willing to raise their voice and suggest that what might once have been forgiven as the excesses of a buoyant national youth had widened into systematic and undiminished cruelty. The Mutual United Brotherhood of Liberty was Dr. Johnson's voice and vehicle to hold America to its professed standard of equal rights under the law and to punish individuals and institutions that would dare to violate the rights of Black Americans. He recognized the need back in 1883 when 4 members of his church made a journey from Norfolk, Virginia on a steamship line called the Bay Steamer. Their passengers were grossly discriminated against. They bought first-class tickets and then were told to go down and sleep with the cattle. They came to him and he consulted with them. And he said to them, 1883, that we're going to file a suit for damages. The case, the steamer stew case, is noteworthy, for it proves one of the first cases wherein separate but equal law was openly projected. Furthermore, this case establishes the precedent in law of test case strategy, which has been used by every legal approach that addresses inequity law. Every group that has sought freedom under the law has used what they created, which was a test case strategy. Through the Mutual United Brotherhood of Liberty, Dr. Johnson had a base for financial support, committed and trained leaders, and the ability to command political attention. He now needed a Black lawyer to champion the causes of his race. At the close of Reconstruction, Charles S. Taylor went to Baltimore to practice law, believing that his admission to the federal district court in Maryland would satisfy Maryland state law. Taylor applied for admission to the state bar in Baltimore. Taylor's application was rejected. In 1877, the Maryland Court of Appeals upheld the right of the state to bar the admission of blacks to the legal profession as a matter of states' rights. Disappointed, the Taylor case, a group of black citizens organized the Colored Equal Rights League, which was determined to see that blacks were seated on juries and admitted to the bar. The league received support from a group of black ministers led by the ferocious Reverend Harvey Johnson. The minister formed an adjunct group called the Brotherhood of Liberty, which I mentioned, was organized to pursue against denial of liberty according to race. The members of the Brotherhood of Liberty pooled their funds, retained Alexander Hobbs, a white attorney, to assist them in their cause. Charles S. Wilson, a black member of the Massachusetts Bar and a teacher in Maryland, was persuaded to test the law, excluding blacks from bar membership, as Charles S. Taylor had done before him. On February 7, 1885, Wilson applied for admission to the Supreme Bench of Baltimore City. Hobbes argued that Wilson was fit and otherwise qualified to practice law in the state of Maryland. On March 19, 1885, the Supreme Bench of Baltimore City, in a unanimous opinion, held that color alone could never bar a person from receiving justice within its limits and jurisdiction. The Brotherhood of Liberty had won the battle, but not the war. For Charles S. Wilson was found not qualified for admission to the bar for reasons other than race. The Brotherhood of Liberty persuaded Everett J. Waring to apply to the Maryland bar after graduating from the Howard Law School. Waring presented himself to the Supreme Bench of Baltimore City and was admitted to the bar, becoming the first Negro lawyer admitted to the practice in the courts in Maryland. The calculated and strategic creation of the Mutual Brotherhood of United Brotherhood of Liberty proved to be a vehicle later modeled with the creation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. One of the footnotes in history was that when W.B. Du Bois called together the Niagara Movement, he looked to Dr. Johnson and the work that had gone on in Baltimore City as to how to shape a national movement based upon what they were doing in that local movement. Because of the relationship between W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, Dr. Harvey Johnson wouldn't go to the meeting of the Niagara Movement. He said that if we're going to do something, we need to do it all together. And because W.B. Du Bois would not invite Booker T. Washington, of which he both was friends, he didn't go. But they used the Mutual and United Brotherhood of Liberty as the model for the NAACP. The reason that the rights of black Americans should be secured through legal means. After a series of successful legal battles, the Mutual United Brotherhood of Liberty commissioned a pamphlet entitled Justice and Jurisprudence. In 1889, when Justice and Jurisprudence rolled off the press of J.B. Lippincott Company, priced at $3, the pagan theology embodied in the jurisprudence of Dred Scott, called the Antique Foot Rule, anonymously hung over the fate of the slave progeny. In Justice and Jurisprudence, the Brotherhood of Liberty did not call for armed insurrection or anarchy, as others might have felt justified to do. It called for a new graduation. You might know, and I hope you would know, that in the Dred Scott decision, it ruled that Negroes are just 3/5 of a man. It called for a new graduation of jurisprudence capable of adjusting to modern times. In keeping with the sociological and industrial progress which had naturally followed this new standard of political truth, the extent to which justice and jurisprudence would or has influenced the law cannot be answered with precision. It surely must have had an impact on those who read it and inspired the lawyers who produced it to incorporate their themes in civil rights litigation. For the Brotherhood of Liberty, justice was the end to be achieved, and jurisprudence was the means to achieve it. This would secure the future of black Americans. The Brotherhood of Liberty consisted of former slaves who, after emancipation, continued to be treated as slaves. They hungered for the trappings of citizenry and were determined to repudiate past ages of slave jurisprudence, which classified people of color as inferior and provided little protection for their rights. Since its publication in 1889, whatever influence justice and jurisprudence has had on American law, its origination stands as the Magna Carta of black people, and its powerful themes now grace the matrix of American law. Causing a black lawyer to be admitted to the Maryland bar provided the Brotherhood of Liberty a key strategic weapon in advancing the legal rights of black Americans at the highest level. The highest level of redress is the United States Supreme Court. If a black lawyer could argue a case on behalf of black Americans before the court, the precedent will be established for the Supreme Court to be the final arbiter for legal issues facing black Americans and removing the fate of black Americans from the hands of local states. There was a case, and this situation is the Navassa Phosphate Company, operating out of Baltimore, used the common 19th century mode of enlistment in hiring contract labor, deception. The company was aided in its search for workers by the short supply of jobs for Negroes in Baltimore. 70 of the men were notified that they were in debt to the company and would have to work for 3 months without pay to absolve their indebtedness. On September the 14th, 1889, Charles Roby threatened a worker with a revolver once too often. And when the ensuing melee ended, 6 of the company's officials were dead. News of the insurrection and massacre was headlining leading dailies. To the Negroes of Baltimore, there was no question where the guilt of Navassa lay, and no question that they must rally to the defense of the accused. A.J. Reed, the president of the Brotherhood of Liberty, instructed Waring to represent the men at their hearing. After the first trial, which began on November the 18th and lasted for 12 days, the jury deliberated 2 days and 2 nights before convicting George Keyes of first-degree murder. The complete series of trials did not conclude until February 20th. By then, 3 men, Keyes, Henry Jones, Edward Smith, had been sentenced to hang for murder. 14 others were convicted of manslaughter and 23 of rioting. When the case was carried to the Supreme Court in Jones versus United States, John Henry Keene was chief counsel for the defense. But according to the Baltimore Sun of October 30, 1890, Waring began the argument against the constitutionality of the Guantanamo law, and in so doing was the first Negro lawyer to speak before the Supreme Court. Here was the man that Dr. Harvey Johnson went and brought and got admitted to the Maryland bar, is now the first Negro lawyer to speak before the Supreme Court. In the Navassa case, 3 of the defendants were sentenced to death by hanging. The case was carried to the Supreme Court in Jones versus United States. The defense contended that the United States lacked jurisdiction over Navassa. The court ruled otherwise. With the Supreme Court appeal lost, the execution of the 3 convicted of murder was set for May 15, 1891. The Brotherhood realizing that all friends of fair play are not identified with one racial group, and that a minority group has much to gain by reinforcing its own mass pressure through the prestige of a larger group, circulated a petition for clemency among whites as well as Negro Baltimoreans. This petition was presented to President Harrison on April 1st, 1891. Here is a committee of 8 Negroes in that day, including Reverend Alexander and Reverend Johnson, going to the President of the United States, President Harrison, asking him to commute the sentence of those that were there. Just an amazing sense of power, just an amazing sense of determination, amazing sense of having what I would call faith in the midst of darkness. And President Harrison accordingly commuted the sentence to life imprisonment. Dr. Johnson attempted to convince the United States government to allow, this is one of the greatest things, one of the amazing things I discovered. Dr. Johnson attempted to convince the United States government to allow black Americans to buy the state of Texas. After expressing his displeasure with the white man's ability and affairs of state and of his ability to ever rise to the heights where he would gain freedom under the laws of the land of Negro people, Dr. Johnson met with a number of his confidants in 1910, created the National Texas Purchase Movement, whose express purpose was to have the United States government to sell the state of Texas to black Americans. The National Texas Purchase Movement Association was organized for this specific purpose of bringing about a permanent settlement between the colored people and this government. We are told that we are burdensome to the government, and such talk is a reflection upon the moral stamina of our race, whose conduct for loyalty and justice has attracted the admiration of the civilized world. But the inordinate, extravagant, and unreasonable conduct of government towards its colored citizens called forth indignation and resentment among us. This is him speaking. Necessitating the formation of this association, whose final objectives are independence and free government, a government that will perpetuate liberty, friendship, and justice, a republic which believes in patriotism, honesty, sobriety, integrity. These virtues are the cornerstone of our association, and upon them the structure will be reared, imparting lessons of thrilling interest and lasting benefits to the race. Needless to say, this idea gained little traction in the halls of government, and the possibilities of far-reaching ramifications has faded into the sunset. Can you imagine now If he had been successful in purchasing Texas, I would have been inviting you over to Texas. Dr. Johnson turned his attention to develop a public high school educational facility for Negroes. The only gain made by Negroes in the opening in 1883 of a combined Negro grammar and high school. Of the 424 pupils enrolled in this school, however, only 18 were in the high school division. The building used for the school, according to Brackett, was in very bad condition. The Negroes referred to it as the so-called high school. Clearly, Dr. Johnson perceived the situation was unjust. Because of the fine education he received at Wayland Seminary, he knew education was the key to the advancement of race in all people. He, along with his colleagues, began a systematic attack to address the issue of no public high school for Negroes in the city of Baltimore. Dr. Johnson writes, "Our friends may say we are to forgive our injuries, but my dear sir, we are not required, as I understand it, to forgive injuries that still continue to be inflicted. Right here in the city of Baltimore, we are not allowed to teach our own children in colored schools. I hold this is a gross injustice. Shall we forgive it while the injustice continues? This so-called high school for colored children is a simple class consisting of 22 scholars who are taught by the principal of the grammar school, who receives the pay of a grammar school teacher only. To crown it all, these children are not allowed to graduate even from this so-called high school department. Is this right? Is this just? It is an equal chance in the race for life. Is it fair? Equally in the face of the fact that they are being kept from year to year statistical records of our progress, which are to count for or against us in after years." He then goes on to indicate that this committee, to whom have been referred the matter of securing a high school and other educational facilities for colored citizens of Maryland, first secured the cooperation of leading colored men in sections throughout the city. They then went before the educational committee of the city council, made their complaint in the form of a petition. In a short time, an ordinance was offered to appropriate sufficient funds to erect a high school and 2 primary schools in Northwest and 1 in Northeast Baltimore. After many visits to the educational committee, the ordinance was passed, appropriating money for 3 schools, but the mayor of the city vetoed the appropriation on the ground that it would increase taxation. However, he stated for our committee that if the council would pass an ordinance for a high school only, he would sign it. Our committee again waited until the educational committee requested them to accede to the mayor's proposition, which they did. And a high school building was subsequently erected at a cost of $25,000. The curriculum was so arranged as to make the school equal in every way to the state's normal school for whites. Thus, Douglas High School in Baltimore City was built and graduated its first class in June 1889. It is the oldest public high school for colored students in America. The ministry journey of Union Baptist Church fifth pastor, the Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson, illustrates an amazing body of work over a 50-year period of time. He demonstrates that one could have faith that brings light to darkness. Reverend Dr. Harvey Johnson literally died having communion at church in 1923. Following Dr. Johnson's ministry was Reverend Dr. David Over from 1924 to 1928. Following him was Reverend J. Timothy Body from 1929 to 1939. Following him was with a recommendation from Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr. was the Reverend Dr. Baxter L. Matthews, who served from 1940 to 1967. My predecessor was the Reverend Vernon N. Dobson, who served for 40 years, from 1960 to 2007. 162 years. 4 clergy leaders served 137 of those years. Dr. Harvey Johnson, 50 years. Dr. Vernon Dobson, 40 years. Dr. Baxter Matthews, 27 years. And Dr. Timothy Body, 10 years. And then here I come as the 10th pastor of Union Baptist Church. I was born and raised and spent my early years in the same block as the church. I literally would run out of my front door at 1211 Drew Hill Avenue run down the street and run into the front door of the church at 1219 Drew Hill Avenue. I was a member of the baby boomer generation. I came of age during the period of great transition and tension within our society. In my youth, the Korean War was waged. During my teenage years, America was ensnared in the Vietnam War. The epic movements of the Civil Rights Movement occurred during my time from the 1950s to the 1970s. I spoke earlier to a class in civil rights, and I was telling them that our church was the staging area in Baltimore for the March on Washington in 1963. Many persons on their way from the South came there. That's where they slept. The buses met there and then took them over. I remember this day, November 22nd, 1963, when President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed. His tragic murder changed the fabric of America, ushered into being a period, I believe, of great cynicism. The murders of civil rights workers, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Robert F. Kennedy, was blows to the psyche of America and impacted my perspective of the society and the world. For me, the world was a dark place. The doors of opportunity seemed to be closing everywhere. I grew up in a nuclear home with a working father and mother. My father, the late Charles A. Hathaway, was the first male in his family to attend college. He attended North Carolina A&T and majored in mathematics. He played on the football team. He left after 2 years to come to Baltimore, where he married his childhood sweetheart from Edenton, North Carolina, my mother, the late Mary Elizabeth Beasley. My mother was a graduate of Shaw University and retired from her career as a postal worker. My father retired after a 27-year career with Bethlehem Steel Corporation at the age of 55. My father was a member of the Pennsylvania Avenue AME Zion Church, and my mother was a member of Union Baptist Church. I literally grew up in both faith communities. Late in my career, I had the distinction of being named the first assistant pastor in the history of the AME Zion Church when I served in the church of my father, the Pennsylvania Avenue AME Zion Church, from 1993 to 2004, with then-now Bishop Dennis V. Proctor. I also have the distinction of being the first assistant pastor in the history of Union Baptist Church. When I answered the call in 2004, I thought I would forever be just an assistant there at Pennsylvania Avenue. Those churches are just literally 2 blocks away. Hence, I served at the churches of my youth in 2 different denominations within the same community as assistant pastor. As a result, I have a ministry career within the Upton community that spans 20 years. I literally have been embedded in that community there for 20 years. My road to ministry was as a community organizer. In 1974, I began my career as a Saul Alinsky-style organizer that was trained by the Industrial Areas Foundation. Many of you may know that President Obama also received that similar kind of training. I was on the organizing staff of the Baltimore's United Leadership Development, called BUILD, now viewed as one of the most powerful mass-based organizations in America. I rose to become its assistant director. From there, in 1981, I became the executive director of the Southeast Vicariate Cluster of Churches in Southeast Washington, D.C. I was in Washington, D.C. March the 30th, 1981, when President Ronald Reagan was shot by John Hinckley. Immediately, I flashed back to that fateful day, 50 years, when America lost the spirit of the Camelot in Dallas, Texas. And then that was another blow to the psyche of America. I was working in Washington, D.C. on June 19, 1986, when Lynn Bias died from a cocaine overdose, just drafted by the Boston Celtics, and an All-American from the University of Maryland. His death was the forerunner of the crack epidemic that hit Southeast Washington and then much of America. Those were all dark moments in the life of America, and each chipped at the storehouse of optimism for life in America. I have to rewind to the rise of 1968 when Baltimore was under siege by the National Guard. That was a dark moment because it created tension within the community between the law enforcement and black youth. We were all seen as potential suspects. During that period, I was in high school and I worked after school. It was difficult to travel through the city with limited public transportation and guards questioning you on every block, every step of the way, asking, why were you on the streets? Upon reflection, much of my view of the world was through a racial prism. It wasn't until I rode across America by bus in 1973 that caused my perspective to change and to realize we were all part of a grand mosaic of humanity. I rode from the East Coast to the West Coast, took the Northern Trail, and then came back through the Southern Trail. I was primarily influenced by a book by Bill Moyer, a book called Listening to America. A traveler rediscovers his country, which was written in 1971. This book stimulated my imagination to see America from sea to shiny sea. I boarded a Greyhound bus with a See America pass. I traveled to places I've never seen before. I met people from different cultures and backgrounds who were exciting to talk to and to learn from. My stereotypes of people were shattered. My faith in God was reaffirmed. My sense of self in the world became more resolute. During my travels, the bus made a stop at Salt Lake City. I sensed it was amazing. I felt coming through the mountains. I went by bus, coming through the mountains. Of course, we ascended up high. It was at night. We came down the mountains, and then we landed in Salt Lake City Basin. I understand what Brother Brigham Young felt when he said, "This is it." From afar, I saw the world-famous Mormon Tabernacle. After that 6-month trip that took me through every section of America, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and rodeos, coming back through Bakersfield, saw the Mississippi at its smallest point and at its widest point. Boise, Idaho, stopped in New Mexico. Just saw all of America. I returned to Baltimore with understanding that I wanted to begin working with people and help creating community. I worked with my uncle, Reverend John Wallace. He was active in political matters in Richmond, Virginia. He created a clergy group called the Committee that ran candidates for the city council. They gained control of the Richmond City Council in 1977 by electing a majority African-American council. From that election, they were able to have Henry L. Marsh elected the first African-American mayor of the city of Richmond. Earlier, in 1969, my uncle's lawyer, he ran him for state senate. And Doug Weiler would later become not only the state senator, he later became the governor of Virginia. And he first later on went on to become the first elected mayor of Richmond. My faith illuminated my darkness when I discovered who I was and whose I was. There is a difference between isness and oughtness. There is a difference between where you are and to what you can become. I could better understand my gifts and skills. I've become a people's person with interpersonal skills and leadership ability. But most importantly, I understood I could organize people. I guess everything came together for me after I married my wonderful wife, Miss Kathleen Bryce Hathaway. I had to put that in there, 1982. After 30-some years, she becomes real truly your helpmate. My children followed shortly thereafter, Alvin Jr. in 1983 and Adaria in 1985. They became my anchors, my reason for being. I was a father and a husband. I also was a person of faith. I matriculated from a series of religious schools and seminaries. You heard them called out. But then in 2007, I was elected the first pastor of Union Baptist Church. And from there, all of these influences, all of these images, all of these understandings, now I didn't have to ask anybody. I could go and act as I believed God would have me to be. Begin to tackle the issue of education in that community, knowing that education is a key, education is a passport. So we organized the 4 schools in that community, caused those schools and applied to the federal government and received the Promised Neighborhood grants. And now we have social workers and nurses in the 4 schools in my community. Our church sponsors a Head Start building. We have 214 students in the Head Start building. And in the Head Start program, and I did not want those students, when we did a study, we realized that when they got to the 3rd grade, they were regressing. So I knew we needed to impact the schools in that community, and we did. And now parents now feel comfortable that their children can matriculate from our Head Start program, go into those local elementary schools, and there will be a continuum of education. I realized that there was a need to have health care available for everyone. And we petitioned and fought and were able to get a health enterprise zone there, and health care for people with chronic illnesses are now available to them. many different issues, I realized that in this era, just like the tremendous legacy that I inherited, I had a responsibility, but also had a responsibility to be an ecumenist, had a responsibility to reach across and to relate to people from faith communities other than my own. And so for the past 4 years, we've been sponsoring a prayer for the city, where faith leaders, and I've worked very closely with leaders with the Church of the Latter-day Saints. I work very closely of Jesus Christ. I work closely with people from the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and other faith communities to make certain that we will stand together always with the sense that we're all working together. And I believe that's how you bring how faith illuminates darkness. Still ringing in my ears was a song of my high school graduation in 1969, a long time ago. The song came from story, The Man of La Mancha, The Impossible Dream. To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, but I believe it's your quest also, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And I know if I can only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest. And the world will be better for this, that one man scorned and covered with scars still strove with the last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable star. I would say to you, my beloved students, to always seek faith. Be led by your faith. Tremendous histories and stories of faith that brings light to darkness. And you'll find that Paul's words were true. That faith is the substance. It's the stuff of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things unseen. Thank you.